Well, hello again, my friends. Today I'm talking about putting stress to rest. And if you've been with me for the last few weeks, you've heard a lot about stress, and you know that I have put all of these episodes into a course called Eating Stress, which is available on my website, teresashillsparker.com/stress. And this will be the fourth lesson in that series. Now, I was only going to do 4 lessons, but I have a couple more up my sleeve I think I will be doing in the next couple of weeks. And we'll put those in the Eating Stress course too, and you can have access to all of that, to the video, to the transcripts, and to action steps, which are not in this podcast, only available by going to the Eating Stress course. So we've talked about what stress is. We've talked about how we allow it to control and take care of our lives when we dwell on the problems and issues, which we don't know how to change, but we think it's our duty to force them to change or make them act in the way we want them to act. And we've talked about what the stressors are and managing those as well, which is hard to do. But when the issues we are concerned about are beyond our control, we're going to worry about them. And then we're going to do crazy things like eat everything unhealthy that we have in the house, or run to fast food to get something even more unhealthy. Yeah, and in addition to this mental and emotional stress that we feel regarding whatever mini crisis or major crisis seems to exist in our world, we now have just added more physical stress to our bodies in terms of additional pounds. Now, our goal should be to put stress to rest, not just with whatever current issue is stressing us out, but to learn how to hand these issues to God and trust Him enough to take care of them in His time and in His way. However, many times we don't even realize what we are stressing over or perseverating about. We just automatically turn to food to try to help us feel better whenever this overwhelm hits us. We use food to try to mask our stress. Mask. Mask is the word for 2020 and 2021, right? But that just numbs our feeling for a while. And then we need more to numb it again. And it's an endless cycle. It's a learned behavior, and we've taught it to ourselves really, really well, too well. The first and most important thing is really to know what your major stressors are. We talked about those, listed those last week, so go back and review that. But before we can put stress to rest, we do have to figure out what are the things that are causing us the most stress. Well, for many years, when I weighed 430 pounds, I thought my weight was stressing me the most. However, my weight was simply a byproduct of my stress. Your weight is probably a byproduct of your stress as well, because I would stress over whatever issue or problem I had, and then I would eat to try to make the stress go away. The eating caused the weight gain. The overeating caused the weight gain. But the real issue wasn't the overeating. The issue was what was causing my stress, because the stress is what made me eat. So it's like a cycle. And it makes us feel like we are going crazy. And that's because we weren't created to handle every single problem that we see in the world, that we see in our friends' lives, in our families' lives, even in our own. We have to stop the insanity of trying to control everything. If we can just stop and clear our minds, we can see everything that is happening to us right now is attributing to our stress because we are living in this state of chronic stress. We never get out of the state of stress. Everything that comes adds to the stress. So everything looks and feels stressful, even good things. And I know because I've been there. So in November of 2000, well, it was actually in December when I was diagnosed with stage 3, 2017, in December of 2017, I was diagnosed with stage 3 adrenal fatigue, which means my cortisol and adrenaline levels were crazy low. They had tanked. And when I got this diagnosis from my functional medicine doctor, I'd never heard of the term adrenal fatigue, but it definitely forced me to stop and look at my life to see what really is going on. Because I realized that I was stressed to the max and pushing myself way too hard. I was managing the staffing and care of 2 mentally challenged young women who lived in our home. I was running 2 coaching groups. I was doing Facebook ads, Instagram posts, Facebook posts, writing blog posts, articles for Charisma, traveling every weekend, and even some weekdays to speak at events or conferences or on a Christian television show. So it was in November of 2017 that my brain said, no, I'm done, no more. And it's interesting that my physical body didn't really shut down. I didn't have, extreme tiredness like some do with this diagnosis, but my brain would turn off every day around 5 or 6 p.m. Now, probably you're supposed to stop working then, but I never did. I was always working later than that. And it was like my brain went on strike and wouldn't think another thought or plan another thing. Brain fog was huge. And all I could do was just take a rest because thinking wasn't available at the time, not accessible. So doctors who diagnose adrenal fatigue say it is helped by healthy diet and exercise, which I was already doing. So was it really adrenal fatigue? Because there are many doctors who don't even believe in adrenal fatigue. But what I believe it was God's way of helping me see that I was really living in a state of chronic stress, and I needed to make some changes. Our bodies can only take so much stress. At some point, the stress is going to surface in some way. Since my brain was running on overdrive, I think that's why it decided to turn off at a certain time during the day. During this time, my full-time staff, who had been with me for 10 years, working with my clients, had already let me know that she was leaving to become a teacher. Now, she gave me tons of notice, 6 months of notice, but her leaving put more responsibility on me. And one of those responsibilities was actually a blessing in disguise. It was to take one of my clients to work and pick her up from work. And that was an hour round trip. Now, remember, my brain is still on strike, right? So I decided that what I really needed to do was fill this time with good, spirit-filled podcasts and audiobooks. My brain wasn't thinking, but I could feed my brain in a way that it needed. So at the time, Ruth Haley Barton was someone I'd never met, but I came across her podcast, and it was centering around how to connect with God through silence and solitude. This was a brand new concept for me. She'd been teaching this for years, but I'd never heard of it. my quiet time with God was never quiet. It was me reading a devotional or a chapter or two in the Bible, taking notes for something I would use it for later, and then I'd tell God my prayer list, voice all the people that needed help and what I needed help with, and tell God my to-do list and ask him to bless it, and then I'd fly into my day and check as much off of that to-do list as I could. I was going from task to task, meeting to meeting, without having time for anything more than what had to be done. What Barton was talking about felt impossible to me, and maybe that's why it intrigued me so much. Her quiet time really was quiet. First of all, she suggested that we should do our quiet time with God in some place other than our office. Now, this was the first hard thing because my office is kind of like my sanctuary, and I always did my quiet time at my desk. But she said there are too many distractions in your office, which is true. Everything calls to you to do something when you're in the office. And that even for a pastor or a full-time minister, doing time with God in their office indicates that their quiet time with God is work. I have to admit, back then, it did kind of feel like my time with God was something I did out of obligation and not because I looked forward to what he might show me. Now, I learned a lot about, what I read from the Bible. I learned a lot, but I also knew that I longed for more intimacy with God. Yeah. When Barton told her story about burning out as an assistant pastor and that she only read the Bible so she could teach it, I identified completely. The Bible had become a reference book for me rather than the book of life. It really is. She suggested approaching the Bible for personal revelation instead of what to speak on that week or what to write an article for that week. And she admitted that when God showed her during these times, some of those things might at some point make their way into a message or something she wrote, but changing the purpose of that time to apply it to her own personal life was really a big key for her. I realized I needed to rediscover the joy, the pure joy of reading the scriptures for myself and then giving God time to not only directly speak to me, but change me. She also suggested after reading to take time to soak in God's presence, to clear your mind of everything and be ready to listen to God's heart cry. At the beginning of this time, she said, the only thing you should say is something like, I'm here, God, what do you want to tell me? And then for the next 30 minutes, close your eyes and tune your heart to his. Now, I couldn't imagine that I could actually keep my mind quiet for that long. But you know what? My heart ached for it. I felt more than anything, this was what I needed to do to help my brain, my mind, my body to rest. I'm really glad that she also mentioned that to start with 10 minutes and work your way up to 30 minutes or however long you want to spend with God. She also said, give yourself grace if you fall asleep. And I have fallen asleep during my quiet time. But she said, maybe that's just what you need at that time. Or if you keep thinking about things you should be doing or your grocery list or 1,000 other things, just see those as floating away on a fluffy cloud and realize that God will bring them back to you if you need to do something about them later. She said, don't take notes. That's hard for me too, because I take notes on everything. But to tune yourself to God's mind and his heart, taking notes is an interruption. And don't have any electronic devices. That this should be a time to listen to God and be in his presence. Afterwards, you can write about the experience because it will be meaningful to you then as well. So the first day I tried this, I knew I would have trouble relaxing. So first I read the Bible. My goal was 1 chapter, but I allowed myself to stop when a verse really grabbed hold of me or spoke loudly to me and ask God, what do you want me to know from this verse? What are you showing me? What are you saying to me? And then I went into my time of silence and solitude, and I did something I learned in grade school gym class. One of the few things I learned that I've taken away from grade school, and that was at the end of our gym class, our gym teacher would have us lie on the floor and do this kind of relaxing exercise. And I loved it back then because my mind was even in a tither back then, always thinking about what I needed to do and what things were happening at home and all that kind of stuff. So what I did and what I still do when I go into my quiet time, I'm sitting in my recliner in my bedroom. That's my place to listen to God. I close my eyes. I start with my toes and I tell myself to relax my toes. Relax my feet, relax my ankles, my calves, my knees, my thighs. I go all the way up my body to my mind, to my brain. I tell my body to relax my spine, to relax my nerves, to relax my muscles, to relax my bones. I even go through the organs in my body and I pay attention to how fast my heart is beating and how fast I am breathing. And then I tell myself to slow down, take deep breaths, and exhale. And then I'm ready. And like I said, if thoughts come to my mind, I just send that issue away, trusting God to take care of it and to return it to me with a solution if he has something he wants me to do about it. Otherwise, I let it go. Finally, I say to him, I'm here. What do you want to tell me? I'm here, God. I speak to him directly. I'm here, God. What do you want to tell me? The first day, I remember I saw Father God on his throne, and he looked the size of a normal man in relationship to me. But he motioned for me to come closer, and as I did, he got bigger, and I seemed to get smaller like a child. And then he invited me to sit on his lap. And when I crawled up into his lap, he became as big as the universe, and I was being held in his arms like a baby. I wasn't a baby, but in relation to him, I was smaller than a baby because he's huge, right? But still close enough that he could hold me. I could see all of the earth like a huge map laid out in his lap. And on the map were all of the continents. I could see the continents and tiny lights, billions of them. And I instantly knew that those lights represented all the people in the world. He was watching over us. It gave me such comfort and peace to know that he really does do that. He really watches over us. But he still held me. But then when I squirmed or I jumped out of his arms, which I did a couple of times, he would gently motion for me to return and then would speak softly to me about how much he cares for me. Now, I stayed there until my timer went off, and it went off at 10 minutes, and that was a really rude interruption to my time. I didn't want to leave. However, I instantly had the feeling that I could come back anytime and crawl up into his lap and be right there with him. As the days continued, I spent more and more time in silence and solitude with Father God or Jesus, who was always there as well. Many times I would climb out of God's lap. He would send me to Jesus, and Jesus would be waiting down a path, and he'd be sitting on a rock, and the rock was beside a river, and beyond that was a hill. It was our place. It was our place to go. And sometimes he would take me on adventures. Sometimes we'd just float in the river and relax. But always I come away from those times of being with God, with Jesus, refreshed, renewed, and ready. The readiness is always strange to me because even though I haven't talked to him about any of my problems or the things on my to-do list, when I come away from my time with him, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do next. Ideas come that I hadn't had before. Insight, all of those kinds of things that I used to struggle with and pray for and try to drag out of God. They just come after my time with him. So this time that I started doing this coincided with the time I was driving my foster daughter to and from work, which lasted about 3 months at the beginning of 2018. But I'm so glad I began this pivotal time with God. I still practice this today because it was an integral part of my healing. Now, since doing that, I have taken out a lot of the stressors in my life, and one of them was dealing with the mentally challenged people that I was taking care of. I loved them, but it was too much for me to handle. And so I think it was around September and October of 2018, we moved those girls out of our home. And I stopped doing a lot of the traveling and a lot of those kinds of things and have been focusing mainly on my weight loss coaching group and the things that I can do online. And this podcast, that was something God showed me to start in 2019. He helps us. He shows us these things, even though we don't plan our progress. We don't plan our days. God will plan them for us. So, like I said, some doctors don't even believe in adrenal fatigue. And I still don't know if that was my issue. But I know somewhere along the line, I had started running on my own fuel instead of God's. My major symptom was mental exhaustion. I know the day my brain switched off, it was November 22nd, 2017, right before Thanksgiving. The next week, my husband and I were headed to Florida, where I had a television interview. It was a really bad time for my brain to go on strike. I couldn't get in to see the doctor before I left, so I just said, God, I can't do this myself. I can't do it by myself. I need you to give me the strength and speak through me, because I know I can't trust my mind to gather the right words to say. That was one of the best interviews I've ever had. Even though afterwards my mind was totally exhausted, during the interview, God simply became my strength. On February 27th, 2018, my brain switched back on. I don't know why. I had been taking some supplements that my doctor had prescribed, but I really believe the main thing that helped was finally learning the value of spending intentional, no agenda time with God. You know, in Matthew 11:28-30, the Message version, Jesus says, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." I think I'm finally living in his unforced rhythms of grace. In the past, I felt like I was carrying a heavy burden of a calling that I had to complete perfectly, like by myself. But in these verses, Jesus tells me those things which feel like heavy burdens are not from him. The things from him will help me live freely and lightly, and I was in desperate need of just that. You may be too. You know, Christian fatigue syndrome is similar to adrenal fatigue, and it's something I'd read about, but I didn't think it was a thing until my doctor explained that I was pushing too hard on life. It happens to those of us who think we are the only ones who can save the world in our specific sphere of influence or calling. Of course, that isn't true, and I cognitively knew that, but deep down inside, the achiever in me pushed me to do more. God's prescription for me was to set aside time in the mornings to just be silent, still, and present with him. In those times, I was made aware of the cacophony of noise in my head and the time it takes my body to relax, clear my mind, and focus on the lover of my soul. During those times, the one I had worked myself into exhaustion for just held me and told me to stop and let him take over, really take over. In doing that, I began to learn how to stop overthinking every issue and problem by simply handing them to him. I had been looking at my life by what I can see, touch, and understand in the natural world. In my times with God, I have been taken to new heights, to an entirely different world that I cannot see in the natural. In that world, there is harmonious symphony constantly playing. And as I listen and play my part in the symphony, there is peace and unity inside of me. Stress, worry, fear, and overwhelm don't exist in that realm. One thing I've learned in dealing with chronic stress is God is not in as big a hurry as I am. Yep, he's just not. When I see my birthdays piling up and I feel like time is short to accomplish all that God has for me to do, I know that if I run ahead of him, what I will be doing is in my strength and will be useless in his kingdom. I learned the hard way that I can't operate in my own strength. God clearly has shown me throughout my journey that he and he alone is my strength. And yes, he gave me gifts and experiences, but those are not what I depend on. I can only depend on God and his anointing. When I draw from his well daily, I have all the strength necessary to do what he wants me to do and leads me to do for that day. I want to do what I see my Father doing and join him there. He will direct me, and if he doesn't, then it's not worth doing, my friends. I finally discovered it's not about pushing, because that always leads to stress, which will eventually exhaust us mentally, emotionally, and physically. So putting stress to rest is really about us resting in the one who made us and the entire universe. It's about allowing him and him alone to guide us in our next steps. And if we don't know what the next step is, then we don't need to take a step until he shows us. When I intentionally focus my attention on him, everything else fades. He is my comfort. He is my strength. In his presence, listening to his heartbeat is where I get my confidence, my creativity, and my will to be daringly bold for him. I come out of my time with him invigorated and ready to face whatever my day brings. Where and how do we put stress to rest? Well, it begins and ends in one place, in his presence. My friend, he is waiting for you. He's waiting for you to come to him, clear your minds, and listen to what he has for you today. So the link for the Eating Stress course is teresashieldsparker.com/stress. The course includes a video and transcript of this session along with action steps to help you begin your own time in silence and solitude with God. The link will be down in the show notes. Sweet grace for your journey.